Welcome back to Ancient Military History, a channel dedicated to providing visual representation of how ancient militaries operated and waged war, going into detail about the real tactics they used to win battles, and showing you, the viewer, how this would have looked in ancient times. In this video, we will be going over the history and tactics used in the Battle of Marathon that took place in 490 BC between the Greeks, led by the Athenian general Miltiades, and the Persians, led by King Darius's commanders, Admiral Datis, Artaphernes, and the former tyrant Hippias. Marathon was one of the first major battles of the Greco-Persian Wars, a half-a-century-long clash whose outcome would determine whether or not the Greek civilization, culture, and ideologies would survive. The peninsula that we call Greece today started out as a land occupied by scattered nomadic tribes, and throughout the centuries, it developed into several hundred city-states who constantly fought one another due to territorial disputes, and they only united if it was in their political interest, such as expelling tyrants. However, though every Greek city-state was different, the peoples had the same speech, the same gods, temples, religious rituals, and even similar customs. It was during this time that archaic Greece saw advances in its language, art, society, technology, and political structure. Greek warfare especially saw advances in its development. Greek battle formations evolved from untrained farmers defending their fields into a disciplined hoplite phalanx. The warrior citizens of Sparta revolutionized Greek warfare with the professional full-time soldiers, and they provided a model for all other cities to follow. By the 5th century BC, other city-states began to assemble their own fighting forces that could be augmented by their body of citizens. Their forces, however, were small and unextraordinary compared to an overwhelming and growing threat from the east. The Persian, or Achaemenid Empire, was at the peak of its strength and used the militaries of its conquered lands to subdue their enemies. Their King Darius the Great could call upon his forces from all over the known world, in times of war or in times of conquest. Darius intended to expand his territory into Europe, and by the early 5th century BC, he made his way west and subjugated the outer Greek colonies, such as Ionia, Thrace, and even Macedonia. It is unclear why Darius specifically coveted Greece, as some historians state that it wouldn't have been for its wealth or resources, but the political instability and uprisings brought on by his newly acquired Greek colonies would have shown Darius the potential strength of the Greek forces, and so he may have targeted mainland Greece to quash a possible threat to his growing western border. Meanwhile, in 511 BC, Athens, the birthplace of democracy, expelled their tyrant leader Hippias. He fled to the Persians, and he promised them control of Athens if they helped him regain his throne. However, the Persian attempts to restore him to power only caused Athens to put itself at war with the Persians. It was around this time that some rebels of Ionia planned to unite the Greek states of Asia Minor in revolt against their Persian oppressors. Athens, who previously wouldn't have gone out of their way to support the resistance, now found themselves on the side of the rebels and sent the Ionians aid in the form of 20 ships. The revolt lasted about 6 years, and although it ended in an Ionian defeat, it showed the Greeks what they were capable of when they stood united against a common enemy. And although it was a major blow to the mighty Persian Empire, Darius was now all the more determined to subjugate Greece, and especially punish Athens for their part in the rebellion. By 491 BC, Darius prepared his forces for invasion. He first sent envoys to all the Greek city-states, demanding jars of earth and water, a symbol of submission to Persian rule. Though some city-states submitted peacefully, Athens responded by throwing the envoys into a pit. The warrior citizens of Sparta followed suit, and they threw their envoys into a well, telling them they could find their water there. A furious Darius dispatched his navy under the leadership of his Admiral Datis, along with his nephew Artaphernes and the expelled Athenian tyrant Hippias. Lastly, in a cruel twist of events, Darius intended to use the Ionian fleet against the Greeks who had tried to help them. The Persians and their naval forces quickly subdued the Greek islands of the Aegean Sea. As they neared the mainland, they went out of their way to fight and enslave the citizens of Eretria, who had also assisted the rebels during the Ionian Revolt. The Persians, in a threatening display of power, showed the Athenians the dismal fate they were destined to suffer for opposing the great Achaemenid Empire. As the Persians approached the Athenian territory, Hippias directed Admiral Datis to station his men at Marathon, whose plains were best suited for the Persian cavalry, and, more symbolically, it was at Marathon where Hippias's father, Pisistratus, had landed many years ago and established himself as the first tyrant of Athens. The fact that Hippias chose the site of battle would have been a slap in the face of the people who deposed him. About 25,000 battle-ready Persians arrived at the Bay of Marathon. When the Athenians discovered the invasion point, a vote was taken among their leaders to determine if they should march out to meet the enemy or fight them from behind the city walls. When they could not come to an agreement, the general Miltiades, who bore a personal grudge against the Persians for deposing his authority in Thrace, persuaded the Athenians to set out and meet the enemy at the bay. Miltiades had first-hand experience of Persian warfare. The main attacking force of the Persians was comprised of light archers, protected by the infantry, who formed a defensive wall with their wicker shields. They would form their ranks 8 men deep, and the elite Iranian troops commanded from the center as many as 10 men deep. The long-range barrage of arrows is then followed up with a heavy cavalry charge from the flanks. On the flip side, the impenetrable Greek defense, equipped with long spears and heavy swords and protected by bronze armor and hoplon shields, excelled at close-quarter combat. The soldiers stood side by side in phalanx formation and charged directly at their opponent until one of them gave way. However, Miltiades knew the Greek battle formation would be at a disadvantage on the plain at Marathon. If the infantry line were to cross the open plain, its rear would be exposed to attack from the swift Persian cavalry, who were also well-trained archers and javelin men. And although the Persian light arrows would be ineffective against the Greek bronze armor, the Persians still had vastly superior numbers. The Athenians only had about 10,000 men, supported by about 1,000 Plataeans and led by 10 Athenian generals, including Miltiades. The Athenians had not yet formed an alliance with any other Greek city-state, except for the Spartans, but they could not immediately send aid, for these citizen warriors, who strictly adhered to the religious laws, could not engage in battle until the conclusion of their sacred Carnea festival, which ended 6 days later. Left to fend for themselves, the Athenians and Plataeans continued to prepare for battle and set up camp on the western edge of the plain of Marathon. They waited 5 days. Each day, a different general commanded the army, and each general decided not to engage when it was their turn to command. It's possible they wanted to wait for the Spartans to arrive, or they possibly had no suitable plan to face the enemy cavalry. However, day by day, the Greeks slowly approached the Persians and felled trees along the way to make it unsuitable for cavalry movements. It happened that 2 Ionian soldiers defected from the Persian army to inform the Athenians that the Persian cavalry had gone. Ancient historians, unfortunately, do not explain the sudden and convenient absence of the cavalry force, and modern historians to this day have reached no consensus. Whatever the reason, this stroke of good fortune is just what Miltiades needed to mobilize his forces for attack. On the day it was his turn to command the army, he marched the troops at dawn, and the Persians, without their cavalry, assembled their light archers and elite soldiers for battle. Knowing of the Persians' battle formation, Miltiades thinned out the phalanx line to 4 men deep in order to match the size of the opponents and so that they could not get behind the Greeks at the sides. The wings, however, maintained their 8 ranks in order to have a strong force defeat the weaker Persian flanks. The battle began. The line of lightly armored Persians faced the shining bronze line of Greek hoplite warriors. The armies marched forward, slowly closing the gap between the 2 lines. Then, as they approached the effective range of the Persian archers, and without breaking formation, the Greeks ran towards the enemy and shouted war cries, much to the surprise of the Persians. And without giving the enemy arrows a chance to weaken their defenses, the Athenians charged into the Persian line and engaged them hand to hand. A long and bloody struggle ensued. Eventually, and predictably, the strong Persian center pushed back the thinner line of Greeks, who slowly retreated but without breaking rank. As they pulled the elite soldiers inward, the strong flanks of the Greeks routed the weaker Persian wings and closed in on the Persian center from the rear. With short spears, wicker shields, and padded clothing, the Persians found themselves no match for the bronze-clad Greek infantry, and, finding themselves crowded and surrounded, the Persians broke into a panic and fled for the coast. The Greeks pursued them in their retreat, inflicting heavy casualties and even capturing 7 enemy ships. Some fleeing Persians, who were unfamiliar with the foreign lands, ran towards the surrounding swampy terrain and drowned. 6,400 Persians perished on this day, while the Athenians lost only 192 and the Plataeans 11. The defeated Persians, who had retreated to their ships, sailed south to attack the now vulnerable city of Athens. Miltiades, however, anticipated this, and shortly after the battle, he sent the bulk of the Athenian army back home. The swiftness of the returning Athenians seemed to have been enough to discourage the Persians, and the fleet withdrew back to Asia. The Spartans finally arrived the next day and congratulated the Athenians on their win. The Athenian victory caused great problems for the previously invincible Persians. The bravery of the Athenians inspired courage in their fellow Greeks, and many subjected peoples revolted against their Persian overlords. For the next 10 years, the Persians had to deal with riots and rebellions from all over the empire, from Babylon to Egypt. King Darius unfortunately passed away before he could resume his invasion of Greece, but his son Xerxes arose to power, and he never forgave, and he never forgot the humiliation the empire suffered at the hands of the Athenians. And while the story does not end there, we'll save the next battles for another day. Thank you for watching Ancient Military History, your go-to resource for the strategies and tactics used by ancient militaries throughout history to conquer their foes. We are a brand new channel, and your support would mean the world to us. So if you liked this video and would like to see more, subscribe to the channel and check out our playlists where we cover the tactics and other interesting ancient battles. And let us know in the comments which ancient military battle you'd like to see next. Until next time, thank you and have a wonderful day.